now I'm going to move to the third question. And then again, this is a question which basically arose from those discussions that I said were from social media, is that the members seemingly they believe, and this was a common one, is that the regulatory bodies in the built environment are not marketing them, are not making them attractive compared to other professions like medicine or accounting. So in other words, the general narrative was that if you registered, it really doesn't add any value to you. Maybe it does for an employer, but it doesn't add any value to you. So now my question is, do regulatory bodies have a responsibility of making their members attractive or marketable? Do they have that responsibility?
Nomvula, I think this one is, we'll start it with you. Do regulatory bodies have a responsibility to market their members?
I'll throw back a question and say, do universities have the responsibility to find employment opportunities for their students? I'm just making an example. Number one, already by virtue of being registered, meaning you are recognized as a professional, somebody has vouched for your competency and you have the credentials for that. On an individual level, that has already made you marketable. Then it's up to you then to see then how do you maneuver and get the opportunities, because remember, the certificate is a certificate to say you have the competencies, but it's not a certificate that says the employer should take you. Do you understand? I'm going back to the universities because, you know, when we were still at universities, when we were choosing universities, there was always a matter of from which university, at which university do you study? And there was a general belief that if you are from certain universities, you will not get employment, but if you are from certain universities, you get employment without saying. That is not the case. There's people that have occupied position not coming from the universities that are generally by the public being regarded as better than better than the others. So the same comes to individual members. The members themselves is that the regulatory body is there. The regulatory body is there for your interest, to guard your interest in that specific profession. But I don't think we can now drill it down to a level of each and every individual and say, as regulatory bodies, how will we then guarantee that you do occupy space in the market? So I don't think that is what is intended to. But what regulatory bodies are there to do is to create a conducive space in which you operate, and not only protecting any other person, still protecting yourself. An example, I'm sure Bonke will talk about that. There's example of issues of tariff of fees or professional fees. The regulatory body is creating that conducive environment to make sure that as an individual, you don't have to fight and negotiate all alone, because there are guidelines and policies and acts that regulate the environment. So there's as regulators, I'm not sure that then if adding value means adding value to the person individually, because I don't think we'll be able to manage that. But it's a holistic, for me, I think it's the holistic environment in which the registered persons practice. And again, there's preferences that employers will always have and all of that. So I'm not sure how the regulator can then come in and intervene on behalf of individual members. Same thing like when clients are looking for professionals to do certain work. They end up even taking people that are not registered. All we can do from a regulatory side and from the VA side is to be a voice for our members and our registered persons, and engage with those people that do not accordingly recognize the roles and the functions of the regulatory bodies and the voluntary associations.
Thanks. Bonke, do you want to add something to that as well?
Yeah, no, sure. If I may, Tammy, add that. Thanks. Mlondi, I do think that both VAs and regulatory bodies have a duty and an obligation to promote and encourage professional registration. And the observation I made is that at university, there's very little understanding of the differences between a regulatory body and a voluntary association. So this conversation is very important, and the phrasing and framing of your question is very important, because my observation is that through conferences we've held, through events we've held, that the students don't make a distinction, and being students, their first question is more like, yeah, but why should I? What's in it for me? It's a very individualistic approach and understanding to it. And I think we need to communicate and educate, but also it's a competition, to grab the students that are eligible to register or practice in a particular direction or field, considering that there is no, insofar as project management, at least, there's no undergraduate qualification in South Africa that is project management. You study other things which can lead you to other professions. And let's not run away from the commercial and funding aspects. Regulatory bodies are self-funding. They do not get transfers from national government or anything like that. So there is the element that numbers matter. I'm not going to shy away from it. Those numbers matter, and we need to capture a particular critical mass to make sure that there is a sufficient pool, a cohort that is constantly replenishing, or a pipeline rather, that is constantly replenishing the pool of registered professionals. And regulatory bodies, I think, need to sell and promote the value proposition of being a registered person. Now, our motivations are not the same. You know, some people don't need motivation to be professional registered. It's something that they desire. It comes from within. They don't want just a degree, but they want to be professional registered. Others need some encouragement and a carrot and a stick approach. But the answer to my response to your question is that I think, and in our past, Nomvula and I'm sure we went to, I don't know how many institutions around the country, and we never went together with the voluntary association. The voluntary association was on with their own timetable, and regulatory body would go on a different part of the time of the year. And I think that may have been a bit counterproductive, because it creates competition that now they must choose one over the other. And I think it's not either or, it's both. Like I think Nomvula and Petra have said earlier, that it's about complementary, there's synergy. The one needs the other. The two they need to coexist. They don't exist in a vacuum. They're there to support each other.
Okay, Mlondi, can I make an example maybe on what Bonke said? For example, I think one of the other things as well, because in these discussions, we must also then self-reflect. We must not be defensive. We must also be prepared to learn. So one of the things maybe that I can mention as example in terms of what Bonke says, for the actual individual, now if you have to drill it down, when you look at the complementary roles, for example, if you were first registered with a voluntary association, by the time you go to a regulatory body, and I'll make a specific example about the SACPCMB because that is what I would know. So by the time when you are at entry level of your registration, say for example, you've been registered with SAIC, SIOSH, ACASM, ACPMM, CIOB, and so on. So by the time you go to council to register, upon assessment, there are those automatic marks that they give you for recognizing that, number one, you already belong to a voluntary association. And then number two, they also then give you some points for recognizing any continuing professional programs that we have done. That is only upon entry at the time at which you register. So already that is the benefit, and that is how you see the complementary role. But if I make a specific example now about SACPCM and ACPM, there's a vice versa as well. If you are a PR with the SACPCM PR project manager, you automatically become a full member. With ACPM, automatically, I don't mean we just say, okay, you are registered. Obviously, there's a process. But the process is that you just fill in your application form, you give us your certificate, your CV, and the proof of your competency. But for the fact that you've already gone through a rigorous process at the regulatory body, that then becomes recognized. So there is that vice versa kind of a complementary role. And one thing that I must also emphasize is that in as much as the voluntary associations will be the ones that will ensure that the members are kept abreast with the developments within the industry, meaning they are doing some CPD programs, they cannot endorse that themselves as well. They're also doing it on behalf of the council, even if they would have validated. But in other instances, you'll find that the voluntary associations don't even validate those courses. They have to be validated by the regulatory body. So there are those kind of complementary functions. But now on an individual benefit, that is what is there at entry point. But maybe what we need to take back as well is then to say, if that is the approach at entry level for the individual benefit, because this is a value that members and registered persons bring, how do we continue with that complementary role for the duration that they are registered? Maybe those would be some of the other things that we need to consider.
Okay, so Petra, the floor is yours. Do you think regulatory bodies have a responsibility to market the members?
Thank you, Tammy. Yes, I don't think it's their ultimate responsibility. I think I'm definitely in agreement with Nomvula in the sense that regulatory bodies have a role to fulfill in the sense of making the industry an attractive industry for it to be an industry that people want to work in, and that it's an industry that is flourishing and a industry that contributes towards the economy, so that there are a lot of jobs and availability in the industry. So that ultimately is the role of the regulatory body, that it's a safe environment, it's something that provides job satisfaction. They are not responsible for finding jobs for people. It's that I think is where the link with partners and VAs can come into it, whereby for our members, and that's our role, is, or part of our role, certainly for the organization that I represent, is to assist members with their continual professional development, to enable them to be marketable to the industry, and to either be marketable globally or locally, and to continually develop themselves and improve themselves, and for students to be able to have internships with companies that we have members that are very active on and actively involved with. So it's more, I would say, for the VAs or for professional organizations, it's more for us to actually do that than regulatory bodies. But I do believe that it is important for the regulatory bodies to have those relationships with VAs in order to refer students or members to the VAs to do that. Absolutely.
Thanks, Mlondi. I'm sure that is satisfactory.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Petra.